This webinar is called The Right Place. And it's the first webinar in a 4-part series where we're going to dive into the 4 rights of animal sheltering. Today, starting with the right place, moving on to the right time, the right care, and finally, the right outcome. But first, I want to introduce you to your hosts today, 2 of my favorite human beings roaming this planet. And I'm not just saying that. Doctors Karsten and Chumkee joined KSMP in 2011 and 2013, respectively, as residents, and they have together helped hundreds of shelters improve not only the welfare of animals in their care, but also the human beings. These days, you'll find these 2 visiting shelters across the country, across our great state of California, as well as online on the Maddie's Million Pet Challenge Learniverse. If you haven't been there, please go check it out. And they're leading cohorts of shelters through change in the 4 Rights Bootcamp, which we hope to see you in the near future. And before we get started, I just want to thank Maddie's, as always, for making this day possible, for making this webinar possible, for making our program possible. Thank you.
It's so great to see everyone, even if it's on this platform. Wait, sorry, nothing against the Zoom, just mean not in person. I would love it if I was actually sitting with all of you in one place. So it is great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm honored to be doing the first of this series, The Right Place. And as Kate mentioned in the overview webinar, and as you'll see as we go through this series, that it really is all 4 rights working together for us to accomplish what we all do every day. So while we do break them apart, remember it is they all rely on each other. And so sort of a theme that you'll recognize as we go through these webinars is that there isn't just one solution. There isn't just one strategy for our challenges. There isn't one tool, and there isn't one right place. Our strategies and our solutions, they don't need to be in either or, but instead they can be and. Myriad tools exist for us to use. To pick your tools, maybe pick up your tools again, maybe if you got rid of them, and give them another try. Because that's what we hope these webinar series will do, that they'll really encourage us to rethink how and what we've always thought of as the right place, the right time, the right care, the right outcome. And that for today, to recognize our opportunities and our limitations of our right places, and not assume that we already know what they are, but instead encourage some real curiosity about what the right place is and how to help people and animals in that right place. So ultimately, remember, our aim with the 4 rights is to feel this feeling. Match the needs that we're expected to meet and have the resources to meet them. Because this feels good. And many of us have felt it. And I want you to remember that. What does it feel like? Because we don't think it's too much to ask. We can put the whole community, all of our neighborhoods together at the center of our work, and we can accomplish this. So what is the right place? That's what we're talking about today. The right place is the place that permits the best possible result for the animal or animals and the person or persons in the most humane and efficient possible way. So we'll just brainstorm. The right place can be lots of different places. It can be the shelter. It can be a foster home. It can be the animal's home. It can be a neighborhood. It can be lots of places. It just depends. It depends on what the animal needs. It depends on what the person needs. And it depends on what the resources are to help them there. So there is no one right place. And it can also be fluid. Where they are today may be the right place for today. Where they are tomorrow could be the right place tomorrow. But here's what we do know. We know that in many cases, we are working against decades old habits and some really well-worn paths in people's minds. That the right place to help animals is at the shelter. That's it. And if we want people to do anything else, and if they want to do anything else, for example, rehome their own pet or look around for the owner of a lost pet that they found or care for a litter of sickly kittens, they might feel like they're out in the weeds and there's not much guidance out there for them. And so we have built this current map in the minds of people, both in our communities, but also probably within our shelter. So we have an opportunity, and many of us have already taken this opportunity to reshape these well-worn paths. Because we've learned about shaping the path and about how ease is our greatest influencer tool that we have. Making it easy, shaping the path, and applying this to how we help people, helping all of us shift towards a different paradigm of how we respond to animals and people in need. So our task is to redesign the map with new pathways, and not to make it impossible for animals and people to make their way to the shelter, but rather to balance it so that these other activities and strategies are equally as accessible and oftentimes even more appropriate for the animals and the people. I want to remind us of three very important principles that can help us focus these myriad strategies and solutions. The first one is the cat pants principle. Home is generally more comfortable than the shelter, and for many of us, it's more comfortable than almost anywhere we could go. So let's just say I could stay home and get a video visit with my doctor or my therapist without ever changing out of my most comfortable pants. I'm in. That is awesome. And for the benefit of many animals, keeping them at home or in a foster home or in a finder's home is better than a night, even in the nicest shelter kennel. Even when there's plenty of room at the shelter, home is better than a kennel or a cage. Keeping a pet, working through it challenging. Ask people to move beyond their habitual responses and expand their area of knowledge by investing in a different strategy. And this strategy, this solution, is usually a reusable and communicable skill. It's something they can do over and over again when faced with helping again, or when someone they know is faced in a similar situation. And so the shift in response begins. The next principle is the vacuum principle. And we've talked about this a lot. And many of us understand this in terms of cats living in our communities, that removing a cat means another cat will just move in. But this also applies to families with pets. Stabilizing animals in their homes, just like stabilizing cats in our neighborhoods, prevents a vacuum from being opened that otherwise would be filled by another intact, unvaccinated, potentially unidentified animal. So for the benefits of ecosystems and for stabilizing chronically unstable systems, we can keep animals in homes, just as we keep them in the community. And this makes sense whenever possible. And we have to recognize the social justice implications here as well. That providing service in the right place means we can support people and pets in every single neighborhood in our communities by keeping animals together with their families and stopping a one-way flow into the shelter and perpetuating the impound shelter rehome cycle. Serving animals in the neighborhoods they're already in, this is how we stop chronically destabilizing homes and populations. Because right place turns off the vacuum, and we know that nature abhors a vacuum. It reduces our need to replace animals from another source, a source that we might see as risky or even problematic. and it keeps animals from needlessly feeding into our shelter systems. Every animal kept in place holds their spot where they are and builds a bridge with our community. It also holds a spot in the shelter for an animal who really does need that spot. And finally, we have the right place tool, using the right tool for the right challenge. And for a long time, we expected to do everything with one tool, intake and impound. But we've shown ourselves and we've shown others that using other tools to keep animals safely out of the shelter help us accommodate both those animals and the animals who really need us. Sick, injured, those in true crisis. So, when we treat animals in the right place, it allows us to admit those and care for animals at a level of care that we all know we can and want to provide. But I'm getting ahead of myself because that's the right care. You'll have to wait. That's coming. All right. I know right now people are feeling triggered. This can be a little triggering. And initially, when we talked about managed admission, this was really seen as a means to an end. That we used this tool in response to crowding. We were trying to not crowd the shelter or have to make decisions based on space. But as we looked for other options, there came this recognition that these other strategies actually led to better outcomes for both the animals and the people. That we indeed had more than just one effective tool. In fact, we had a whole toolbox. So over time, we've recognized this innate value as a life-saving tool that particularly helps keep pets with their people or their neighborhood and offers care that the families and the animals need. We can triage services and needs instead of assuming that intake is just our default option and our only tool. And managed admissions is not just one thing. It's not just like this one nicely packaged, thing. It's in fact a variety of complementary programs, approaches, and solutions that work together to accomplish the goal of giving animal access to the right care in the right place. And just as we cannot paint with a broad stroke that all animals should come into our shelter, we also cannot paint with that same broad stroke that all animals should stay out of the shelter. No one strategy best suits all animals. We help a lot of animals and a lot of people, and they have a variety of needs. They're all unique, which means we can and should have our whole toolbox. And as much as we want this today or we wanted this yesterday, this takes an investment. It takes an investment to set this up to allow it to work, and it's going to take time. This is not something that's going to happen overnight as much as we want it to, and it's likely that the road to get there is going to be a little bumpy. But that's why we're here, to talk about what we need to get us from where we are now to where we want to be. And in that vein, we've decided to maybe call it something a little different. A lot of us in animal welfare and not are very familiar with triaging. It's a term we use in terms of our own care. So maybe we can apply it here too. And remember, it can be really hard and frustrating to know if all of our tools in our toolbox are working. So for example, let's just say we put it on our website of what we want people to do when a certain thing happens, right? So we put it on our website. If you find an animal, do this. And lots of people will do that. But if we still have people coming to the shelter and it feels like we're having the same conversation over and over again, we can feel like our tool of the website is not working. But here's the thing. We can't measure the success of prevention. We can't measure the conversations that didn't happen. If someone went to our website and they found what they needed and they didn't end up coming in, that's fantastic, but generally we don't always know. So, toolbox, have all the tools. Some will work and we won't even know it, and others will work and we will. I'm just going to make a plug for these. Some great reading, if you haven't already, to really important resources for you to read and share with everyone you care about, because it's just really fascinating. And then my final note for you all is that we all deserve some clarity. We are in a very challenging and often frustrating time right now in terms of our staffing and access to care that can be happening throughout our communities. So we're frustrated, and possibly the people in our communities are very frustrated too. And it could seem that changing the way we handle intake is leading to this lack of resources, of care, of spay neuter, but it's not. Triaging services and changing the way we interact with the public, this took off during the pandemic. The pandemic afforded us the opportunity to try different strategies. And most of us experienced really positive impacts because of that. But at the same time, there was a decrease in availability of care. But one did not cause the other. As much as some folks want that and think that to be true, it's not. Because what we know is that shelter intake is not a solution to the inability to access spay, neuter, and other services. But instead, triaging care helps get animals care that they need in the right place. And not just during times of crisis, such as a pandemic, but all the time.
Thanks, Dr. Karsten. So the role of communication. I'm going to take one step back. Dr. Karsten has been talking about clarifying with the community and stakeholders about changes in policy and practices and why things are important. And I'm going to take this one step back and make sure that, of course, we first focus on communicating clearly with our internal stakeholders, right? Our staff and our volunteers, our personnel who get our work done. So we know that so much of this work is, it's a labor of love and it's a labor of dedication. And our frontline staff deserve clear communication and support when changes are made and when policy or practice changes are made. And I wanted to note here that, and I was looking this up, many studies show that when changes occur in an organization, there will be a high number, and this probably seems really obvious, but there's a high number of folks in leadership positions who understand why this change has occurred. But then as you go down the system, the percentage drops when we get to managers, and then it drops even lower when we get to frontline staff. And so it is the frontline staff that gets the work done every day out in the kennels and out in the adoption wards. And so it's so important that we clearly convey what changes are being made and why. And so it's the why. I think the why here is so important so that folks can feel like they can get on the same page. And then explaining where we're going to start, what's expected, what looks like success. Because if we don't explain what success looks like, then people will constantly be wondering if they are doing the right thing. So explaining the what, the why, and of course the how, but then also being open to a two-way system of feedback, right? So ask your staff, ask your volunteers to let you know when they have concerns and be open and curious to those discussions. Oftentimes, those discussions from frontline staff can bring us solutions that we would not have thought of in the first place, right? And then it's really important that, and we'll talk about this in a little bit too, a lot of what we're asking our staff to do is different from what we focused on before. So we might need to incorporate different components of training. For instance, with triaging animals and services needed, we might need to do some training in case management, in active listening, in problem solving, risk analysis, decision making. And then this is a really important one. When it's possible, provide scripts for everyone who's going to be communicating with the public, because you all know this, we know this really well. Consistent messaging is so important, and it's going to make the public have confidence in any change you're making. So then let's step forward to where Dr. Karsten left us off with in terms of public communication. And I won't belabor this because Dr. Karsten made this point that clarity, erring on the side of too much clarity never hurts. And often what looks like resistance from someone or groups of people might be a lack of clarity. So if we really want to focus on centering our work around the community, we need to harness the power of the community, and we also need to communicate with them clearly. And I think too, I mean, of course we have our staff and our volunteers, but remember there's the entire community, which is made up of a lot more people than who we have in our shelter that we can seek help and support from. So, however, also remember though, that when changes are made around policy or practices, people will focus on how those changes impact them and impact their needs. So it is important to acknowledge the reality of change and have empathy for how change affects the public and people. And then recognize why it's so important to frame the why behind your change. So again, focus on what you will do as opposed to what you won't do. For example, we're on a mission to serve and support animals and pet owners who need us the most. And this is really important because it allows us to improve our services and improve positive outcomes. So again, focus on what you will be doing. For the right place to be successful, most importantly, conversations and interactions have to happen before the animal and the person arrive at the shelter. And this is because we need folks to consider and give them ideas about different solutions before they directly come here, right? Or else coming to the shelter is always the default right place. And it's usually too late to try to create an alternative right place. So to create that messaging with the public through a lot of clarity, we need consistent messaging through multiple outlets and avenues, and often in multiple languages based on your community's composition. And we also need to make it easy for people to be able to communicate with us. So shape the path so folks can communicate with us. We want to be really crystal clear in our messaging. And one example is if our front desk staff is often pretty angry that folks keep bringing their pets in without calling, then we might need to take a step back and ask, have we made it as clear as possible as to what the public should be doing? So it's taking that step back and asking what we need to be doing. And one particular point around communication is that time and timing are a really critical component of shaping the path for the public when policy or practice changes are made. It's also an important part for the staff to allow them to have time to do what they need to do. And so you probably know that we're talking about intake by appointment here. And so intake by appointment is one of the most powerful path shaping tools for shelters to ensure that animals receive care in the right place. And honestly, a lot of folks nowadays, we want the ability to schedule an appointment. So harness that kind of social and personal desire, because it's a big help. When shelters have found and data has shown, and we found that when we ask folks to call first, it can really support us in achieving the right place for every animal. So it builds in that pause between the impulse to bring in a healthy animal, either out of frustration or concern, and builds in that pause where the pet owner or the finder and or the shelter can help the person find some alternative solutions and have a more thoughtful decision-making process for that finder or owner. So ideally, appointments should apply to all non-emergency intakes, including healthy stray cats, found kittens, owner surrenders, and depending on the circumstance, stray dogs as well. But of course, very importantly, ensure that your staff knows that they're empowered to make exceptions when appropriate, because of course, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution here. The default choice should be for folks to first call and then come in by appointment. But of course, staff should have the ability to make exceptions when needed. And just one little plug here, this slide is really just a reminder that the logistics around setting up appointments is just as important. So ensure you're using a software system that can help you with scheduling. Also schedule appointments strategically, maybe around times that adoptions are slow, or when staff have time to invest in speaking with the public with patience and compassion and empathy, and can take and feel that they have time to really talk on the phone with someone. And then some other bits around appointments is that when folks do come in, find a location that's comfortable for them, that feels confidential, but also warm, and just ensure that people feel that we are treating them with respect and also good customer service. We've all felt this way when we've gone to get any service provided, that even if the wait time is long and we didn't get in exactly at our scheduled appointment time, just acknowledgement by a service provider makes a big difference in how we approach the situation and handle the situation with that service provider. Okay, let's shift, because much of what we are talking about is about, sorry, Charlie. A lot of what we want to talk about is based around those three principles that Dr. Hurley and then Dr. Karsten have primed us for. And so a lot of this is around return to home and the power in return to home. So let's again focus on putting the community at the center of everything we do and shift to community-based solutions for lost pets. We've done this for community cats, and we can also do it for dogs. And I think a lot of shelters are finding that they can, because during COVID, that is exactly what happened. So first and foremost, with lost and found pets, remember that experience and data show us that pets are more likely to be reunited with their families if they remained in the neighborhood that they're found in. When we physically remove an animal from its neighborhood or its community, we innately create barriers to that reunification process. And the barriers might be transportation, it might be language, it might be cost, but we create barriers every step of the way. And so one of the ways to remove those barriers is getting animals back into their home, in the field, in the neighborhood. And so folks have heard, I know y'all have heard about finder foster programs and return to field programs. And these programs, as Dr. Hurley and Dr. Karsten have mentioned, really stabilize community populations by returning animals to their homes instead of bringing them into the shelter. So this is an interesting finding Dr. Karsten had relayed to me, in that in the city of Austin, they wanted to look at some statistics around cases where community members had filed found reports for lost pets. And this was right before the pandemic, and they looked at 650 reports filed, and they were able to contact over 200 folks. And when they spoke with those 200 finders, they found that over half of the dogs found were able to be returned to their owners, and 37% of cats were returned to their owners. So these folks, these neighborhood community members, did this without us, and many of them did it on the first day that they found that pet. I suspect that you would see the same type of statistics in your neighborhood. And it conveys to us this power of the finder foster type of programs. And what it means to us is that if we were to help finder foster programs, those numbers and percentages would probably increase, right? So helping people harness technology, empowering them to be able to scan animals with microchips, etc. So, Dr. Karsten, next slide for us. Oh, back one slide. Oh, okay, that's okay. Just a little bit about foster finders and supporting people in getting pets back into their homes. There was one program I wanted to specifically mention here. And y'all might have heard this. It's the First 48 out of Cabot Animal Services that Mike Wheeler, the director of that shelter, shared with us. And he shared on some calls nowadays as well, some national calls. And this program really wanted they not really wanted, they asked the community to help get lost pets back to their homes. And so this program started when the shelter found that most animals are picked up within a quarter mile of their home, and they're returned at higher rates if they aren't taken to the animal shelter. So the shelter decided to empower their community and to ask them to hold on to a found pet for the first 48 hours. They logged that animal in the shelter system. They got them online, right? But they asked the finder to hold on to that animal for the first 48 while the shelter actively searched for its home, for the pet's home, and provided food and supplies to the finder as needed. What they found is that pets have an 81% chance of getting back home if that pet doesn't come to the shelter. And they have a 17% chance of getting back home if they do come to the shelter. So drastically different percentages there, right? And this shelter has really been focusing on breaking that cycle of pet owners losing their dogs and then replacing them if they aren't able to get them back. What I really love about the First 48 is that it provides a definitive time and end date for the finder, so we can kind of imagine the psychology of a finder. We've all been in this place, right? Like sometimes it does cause anxiety to find a lost pet or a stray dog, and it gives some comfort to the finder in that, please don't go overwhelmed with concern or anxiety. There's a defined timeline here, and then we will figure out what to do with this animal. But the likelihood is you'll probably get this animal home on your own. So thanks, Dr. Karsten. And one more note here: if we're asking finders to look for owners, of course we can and should be asking our field officers the same. And one second, Charlie. And when we really harness the power of our field officers in helping pets return to one moment, hold on. Okay. Sometimes it's a lost cause, right? Okay. So I didn't lose my spot because this is so important. When we harness and encourage and support our field officers, to get pets back to their homes in the field, we shift away from an enforcement frame of mind to support, right? And we remove barriers to getting pets back into their homes, and we build relationships with communities. We invest more in our community, we invest more in service, and people will notice that. So this graphic is just a very simple graphic of, what do we need? What do we need if we want to make that shift and build bridges with the community? And so we want to empower our field officers. We want to equip them with the right tools to make it easy for them to get pets back into their home while they're in the field. And also, I'm just thinking about this now, a big part of this too, and we did put training in here. A big part of this is encouraging and asking our field officers to, they're already our eyes and ears in our neighborhoods. And so asking them to continue being our eyes and ears, and using that, kind of leveraging that power and that strength, and letting us know, what does the community need? Like, man, I see a lot of X in this neighborhood. It would be great if we could provide this solution, this solution for this community. So really harnessing the power of our field officers. Okay. Oh, sorry, Dr. Karsten, our slides, I think, got a little mixed up. I totally talked about Finder Fosters already. Skip through that. Great program, First 48. Could talk about that a lot. Skip through this one, Dr. Karsten. That was about First 48. All right. Now, quick note around cats, right? We've been handling cats with return to field for longer than we have for dogs, but just a quick note here, right? There's, especially since you probably, folks might see more cats in the neighborhood and on the streets more so than dogs sometimes. There's kind of this like historical context of people wanting to save cats, and there's this impulse towards like being the hero and bring the cats in. We've talked about this a lot. So again, it's really important to validate their concerns and their feelings, but this is our chance to pivot a little and talk about this concept of what happens when you bring cats in and what their perspective is, right? So provide some perspective from the cat's state of mind, as well as the shelter, but acknowledge that people have emotional, kind of intuitive desires to help animals, of course, and give them positive steps to help in the situation no matter what. So quick breakdown for healthy cats. This during the pandemic, we shifted how we care for healthy cats, and it really gave us permission to rethink the management around free roaming cats. And I wanted to note this too, because Dr. Hurley had noted this, that NACA during the pandemic suggested that officers seize trapping and intake of healthy cats. And then even, later, more recently, NACA made a statement that the indiscriminate intake of healthy free roaming cats doesn't meet the needs of the shelters or communities. And it's as a general activity, it should be discontinued unless there's special circumstances. So that was really powerful, right? So healthy cats try to shape their path by discontinuing field pickup, or maybe it's requiring intake by appointment, or providing nuisance abatement, or resources for finders. But in general, for healthy cats, if you have the capacity to do surgery on them, bring them in, regardless of their temperament, and put them back out. If not, then if you don't have surgery capacity, refer them out to a local clinic. If that's not possible, then leave healthy cats where they are until capacity for surgery comes up. For sick and injured cats, the right place is either the shelter or the local veterinary clinic, depending on your capacity. And lastly, for kittens, we know a lot of this, but the shelter is just never the right place for healthy kittens if they're too young for adoptions. And we've done a good job, but we need to continue convincing the public of that. So depending on whether mom is present or not, and what their age is, and if they're healthy or not, if they're weaned or not, the ideal scenario is for kittens to stay with their mom in the community, support community members if needed, and then bring them to the shelter, ask them to be brought to the shelter when they're about 4 or 5 weeks old. And then the kittens can go into foster until they're ready for surgery. Mom can be surgerized and returned. And that's the best option for kittens out there. If mom isn't present, because, and especially you can tell because the kittens aren't healthy or something's going on, then hopefully you can bring them in and get them right out to foster. Thanks, Dr. Karsten. Oh, and this is just a little tidbit. Just wanted to share that y'all have hopefully seen and used some of these great graphics that are out there and marketing materials, but really this idea of connecting the public emotionally to the experience of the animal, right? Through what's it like for the animal to be in the shelter, and make it clear that this is not about the shelter trying to do less work. It's about trying to keep animals in their communities or in their healthy situation that they're in. So just using some not too heavy-handed guilt or moral friction here, but using that and leveraging that, especially when you're beyond your capacity and really when you need to invite community members to share in the responsibility of a positive outcome. So next slide, please, Dr. Karsten. I know we spoke a lot about return to home, return to field for dogs and cats, really harnessing the community, and wanted to share these two beautiful pictures because a lot of this focus is on return to home, because return to home is return to home. And we can, I think, feel the emotion that these two photos evoke. And just very briefly, I wanted to touch on that building relationships and bridges with the community means we need to determine what our organization has the capacity to provide. So it might be spay neuter, it might be basic supplies or basic food or behavior training, etc. But we also need to look out into the community to see what the community can help us with. And so we are experts in animal welfare, but oftentimes people bring in animals for issues that are well outside of our field of knowledge and expertise. So this means we need to harness our community members and have resources or referrals available for other reasons that might be why people are bringing pets to us. So resources around food or housing insecurity, domestic violence, mental illness, disability, grief, and loss. Wanted to share that here for a second. And lastly, we're asking a lot of our staff. We're asking a lot of our community, but I shouldn't say that. It's not a lot. We're finally asking. I should just say that. We're finally asking folks to help us in sharing the responsibility around getting animals to their positive outcomes that they well deserve. And so an important piece of this is to remember that roadmaps, tools, communication, all of that is so important to ensure that these changes that we're trying to make, to ensure that animals get to the right place. And again, to reshape those old paths that have been well worn, that we are doing the best we can to reshape those paths. So, Dr. Karsten, last slide. We wanted to thank you for joining us. These are our emails if you need us. Charlie the dog is happy you stayed with us through the presentation, and we'd be happy to help with questions now.
I've been staring at Robin's question.
Yes.
How do we get municipal shelters to stop intaking healthy cats with ear tips? My first thought is to have some curiosity, to ask why these cats are, why that is being used as the strategy, and then to understand why it's happening, have some curiosity about what is trying to be accomplished versus what is actually being created, and then asking, what would it take? What would it take to stop intaking these healthy cats? what would it take to, let's just say it's fear of something bad happening to the cat. So what would it take to alleviate these fears? Or what would it take to have a different strategy? I think understanding the why behind what's happening can be really important to then have a conversation about intent versus impact. So I understand now better why. I would like to share the impact of the intent and take it from there and see if it can't be found, a different strategy can't be found that better meets the hopeful shared goal of keeping cats in the right place.
And Dr. Karsten, I think that, probing a little and ensuring you understand the why behind this practice helps to find both rational and emotional solutions to the challenge, right? So you can throw stats and numbers, because there's tons of stats and numbers out there that that you could use, that you could throw at this municipal shelter or municipal shelters in general. But there might be other reasons that are more emotionally based that you'd have to address as well to really convince some folks. So understanding the why helps you address both of those facets of why people do what they do.
I believe Dr. O'Neill provided one why in the chat, that we could be met with the response, because the cat is friendly and therefore needs to come indoors. To which I would say, I agree, the cat is friendly. Ergo, there's someone who loves this cat right where they are, because cats don't default to friendly. I think we've all had enough experience with cats around to know that the act of a cat being friendly lets us know there's someone out there caring for them, and should give us even more confidence, if you will, especially if the cat's looking good, that there's someone who, if we remove the cat, is missing the cat, or maybe multiple people. So, and speaking from experience, I've not one time ever had a cat live with me who has a preference to the outdoors or to the indoors solely, that many of them enjoy, and have an extremely good quality of life by trouncing around the out of doors. That even includes in cold climates. So these can be long discussions, but finding a place of things we agree on and starting the conversation from there, hopefully brings us to a shared goal. I love this next question, on helping folks who really identify and have a pride around being open at mission and embracing the 4 rights. I love this question. They are not mutually exclusive. That's the best part. We can be open at mission to having animals receive our care, but that doesn't mean the care has to be in the shelter. We absolutely want to hear from people, all people. But how we do it, how we respond, that's the key. We are now individualizing care. It's stepping up the care. It is stepping up what it means to be within our shelter system. It doesn't mean you physically have to be here, but you are going to be someone. We are open at mission to providing help. And I think that is a pride and a badge of honor that I would like to wear. Dr. Aziz, anything to add?
I think that when people identify something in a very personal way, it means that they're very emotionally driven. And I think a lot of our work is, and so conveying using that kind of moral friction, that concept of moral friction, and conveying that there is a better solution. There is a different solution. There is an even better solution that keeps pets and families together, that propagates social and racial justice and equanimity is really important. But appeal to that emotional side, because I think that's where that's coming from, and I get it. Yeah.
So we have one last question, but only 2 minutes left.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So the general community gets this, but it seems that the most resistant folks are cat trappers. I think because they feel obligated to take them in and start becoming overwhelmed. Are there any suggestions in talking with this community and helping them understand?
Oh, this gets, I'm guessing we're not talking about those that trap surgery in return. There's many layers to this, at least in my experience, of the why behind this. And so, the strategy needs to be individualized and understanding their why, and understanding again the impact of the removal, and that each situation is also individual. If we're talking about an area that is overwhelmed with cats, we deal with that in a certain way. If it's just, in my 2 minutes, very overwhelmed by finding an answer that would fit in every situation, I guess, in understanding, but that it all comes down to asking, having curiosity about why the need to trap these cats, why the need to help me understand, and then we can find a different solution.
Dr. Karsten, Annette shared a great answer, and she said holding community meetings has been successful for her. And Annette, that makes me think of too, we talked about external communication, and the importance of figuring out what medium of communication works for what group of people. And so folks who are really dedicated and emotionally driven, especially external stakeholders, having smaller focus groups with them or community meetings with them builds that connection, that one-on-one connection, and can make them, that means you are listening to them and you're taking their concerns into account. And then one-on-one explaining what it means from the shelter's perspective and the cat's perspective. Mm-hmm. But I think it's that key there of figuring out the why and how to communicate with different groups of people, like you've suggested, Annette.
And Chumkee, what you had mentioned earlier about just pivoting the conversation around what it means to be a hero and acknowledging that it comes from a place of compassion and a desire to help, and just going back to that place. Okay, unfortunately, we are out of time. You guys, this was so wonderful, but I just wanted to remind everybody that the conversation will continue over at Maddie's Pet Forum. The link is in the chat. We'll drop it again. And some of the resources you asked for, I'm going to go post those there for you as well. Drs. Karsten and Chumkee, thank you so much for your time today and for leading such a wonderful and thoughtful discussion. Everybody, we will see you back April 26th, where Dr. Delaney and Hurley will take us on to the right time. See you soon. Thanks for joining us in the first part of this 4-part series. And thank you, as always, Maddie's Fun, for having us.